to join us today, particularly Hewlett Foundation. Angela DeBarger is here. Hi, Angela. And so I really want to say a moment to appreciate their support of the SCORE Network and the reason why we are here today. Maggie is going to be sort of piloting from a tech perspective our meeting. She's awesome like that. And I'll sort of do some of the facilitation back and forth. We're a small group. If you have any questions at any time, please jump in and ask. I think in terms of the structure, we'll go on the structure of sort of how we're going to run the next bit of time. But generally speaking, this is a celebration of work. I want to thank everyone who's involved in today, from the all the way from the presenting side to all of the people that have been involved in all aspects of the project. Hopefully we'll just kind of see a nod to folks as we give our grantees the opportunity to present their work, and maybe that'll, as a result, introduce us to some additional folks who we may not be familiar with from other activities. But I just want to say this is a celebration, so enjoy each other's work and what you're bringing to the community. I think this is wonderful, and thank you so much for spending time with us.
I'm going to jump in for just a second and just do the official announcement that we are recording this, and it will be available for others to view in the future.
Thank you, Maggie. So just a quick overview of how we're going to spend our time together. I'll go through a little bit of introduction and context setting for the presentations we'll have today. Each of our mini grant recipients will then have some time to present. And then at the end, we are going to just leave time for questions across all of the projects. Of course, if folks have a little bit of time left after talking about their individual project, we can certainly have some questions at that point. But for the most part, we wanted to leave a lot of time after, because there are some similarities across projects. And so we wanted to give the opportunity for folks to ask questions that might be answered differently or similarly by different partners, and get you all to see that as well. So a little bit about the SCORE Network, which is the group that organized this. The mission of the SCORE Network is to help our network participants, all of you, all of your organizations, achieve your sustainability and broader impact goals by working together to amplify the value and reach of open education in STEM, and to align those resources and practices with principles of anti-racism, equity, social justice, and inclusion. This is a statement. I won't read the entire thing, but the statement as a whole was co-crafted by many of the network members that are here today. And so again, I thank you for your participation in that part of the process as well. You'll see this, I hope, echoed in many of the projects that we're talking about, this idea of working together to do something that helps achieve our goals, and keeping open, and open for whom at the center of all of those questions. So the project I mentioned that we're here today to talk about, these projects were supported by the Hewlett Foundation and their education program, which awarded to Bates College a grant to further support SCORE Network and CUBES, which is a partner of the SCORE Network. And so that went into some infrastructure support for CUBES. It went into what we were calling an SJEDI, Social Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Learning Community, which we ran over this past summer and which we hope to continue to offer in the future. We also ran a STEM Education Project Leaders Inclusivity Network, or what we called SPLINE program. We actually believe there was an NSF grant submitted today to continue that program in a new format moving forward. And we also, or the last final thing was this collaborative pilot program, the mini grants program. The reason that we came together to do this is that we had this wonderful meeting pre-pandemic, and how long ago was that? I think it feels like forever ago. But we had these wonderful conversations that were really getting at this collaboration, and it just felt like if we could just get a little infusion, then we could really do some pilots together that would be really exciting and lead to new opportunities. And so we did this solicitation across the SCORE network. We wanted to develop, to have proposals that would promote sustainable development or solutions that would promote sustainability moving forward, would give something back to the SCORE network in terms of insights from the projects. We wanted to, in particular, encourage collaboration, and in particular, hopefully, from folks who hadn't yet formally collaborated in the past. And so each of these proposals had to have at least 2 SCORE network participants who wanted to work together to do something together exciting. So we have a variety of projects that hit that. The first is ISKME and CERC. Of course, I'll talk more, so I'll just give a brief overview, but they have released, worked on and have released an accessibility evaluation framework to support STEM faculty in thinking about whether their resources meet accessible standards. CoreSource and Cubes work together to develop a prototype of the CoreSource website to move and port to Cubes Hub. That's pretty exciting because of some cost on cyber infrastructure that CoreSource has had to really invest in, and hopefully this helps there. You'll get to see some of the results of that. Simiode, also very similar kind of venture, thinking about the technical side of the port, because actually Simiode already uses the same cyber infrastructure, but moving resources across, and then thinking about that, what that looks like on Cubes also as a project that they are undertaking. And then MM Hub and CoreSource collaborated on a math modeling writers workshop, which CoreSource had run for biology community, and MM Hub looked at adopting that. We did have a 5th awardee. Due to the pandemic, that awardee unfortunately had to pull out shortly after the award was made. What we did as the SCORE organization is we put the resources back into the 4 projects that you see here to think about funding next steps. So we wanted to make sure that it aligned with the spirit of this program. Anyway, that is really it for me. I just want to thank all the partners that are involved today. And the first up, I think, is ISKME and CERC. Is that correct? Maggie can correct me.
I don't think we had necessarily an official schedule, but sure. Take it away.
Guess what? ISKME and CERC are
great.
Up, so.
All right, we'll jump in. It's going to be myself. I'm Amy Evans Godwin, and my colleague at ISKME, Cynthia Jimes, and Sean Fox at CERC. So Cynthia is going to share screen with some slides.
How's that looking?
Great. I think we're seeing the whole thing. Okay. So, well, thank you so much, Carrie and Maggie, for that introduction and for all your help over the last 7 months with our partnership with Bates and SCORE and Cubes. It's just been a fabulous experience. And for anyone that doesn't know, ISKME is a nonprofit based in California. We conduct social science research across the education field, and particularly around OER, and do professional learning, and have developed OER Commons Digital Public Library over the last 15 years. So we're really squarely in this space, and primarily looking at the ways that OER can be better used. And this project dovetailed very well with work that we had done, started prior with CAST, a longtime partner that's focused on accessibility, and had built upon some of this early research and early framework work. And this project in particular, with CERC, has been seeking to expand on this work and to test a preliminary accessibility evaluation framework to bring that into a refined version for the public. And really what we have come out with is a full guide with the refined framework that we were particularly deeply involved with our advisory group that I want to thank so deeply. Haley Orndorff is with us on this call, but also Hannah Davidson, Drew Hasley, and Cynthia Curry of CAST were our advisors on this and really contributed to the work. So we were really looking to answer some questions around what will support STEM faculty to select and tag OER. Our work is very much about accessibility metadata and making materials more discoverable. And then how to build faculty knowledge around accessibility, particularly for STEM, at their institutions and across institutions. So with the guidebook, it's very much an instructional tool to build faculty knowledge around accessibility and ways to integrate STEM curriculum and instruction more easily into their courseware so that they can reach all learners. And this point in particular is the way we defined accessibility for the project. We're very much grounded in the National Official Office for Civil Rights, OCR, U.S. Department of Ed definition of accessible, but we also have been seeking to broaden that around OER in particular to include the principles of equity of access and use that's called for with the use of open education and described in guidelines for the Universal Design for Learning, UDL. So we came up with another term we call OER accessibility to really define this in terms of emphasizing multiple options for learners, learner preferences, to include ways that teaching and learning content can explicitly address diversity, equity, and inclusion for all learners. That goes beyond the legal confines, the definitions of accessibility that might address disability on its own and broaden that. So I'm going to pass it to Cynthia to talk about how we did this, and Sean will join us to discuss the inner workings of the guidebook.
Great, thanks, Amy. So, as Amy mentioned, we had 4 advisors that we recruited as subject matter experts. So Haley being on the call, thank you, Haley, as well as Cynthia Curry, Hannah, and Drew. So with their input, we started to develop or build out an existing accessibility checklist that we had been working on and some supporting definitions. And we really wanted to target STEM faculty and think through the lens of what kinds of content would they be evaluating and how do we put the OER piece into our accessibility checklist. So once we built that out with the advisor input, then we recruited STEM faculty to really sit down with the guidebook and evaluate an OER, an open educational resource. And as they worked through the guidebook, they filled out a form that kind of allowed us to see what their feedback on each element of that framework or that checklist was. And then we took all that data from that pilot and we built it out even more to have more supporting features. So it was the checklist, and we'll go through this in a minute, but some definitions and some considerations that they could use as they work through the accessibility evaluation of resources. So resulting framework then, Amy mentioned how we really wanted to define accessibility in OER through this new lens. And then we built out the framework in the guidebook around 23 accessibility criteria. And we used the Web Accessibility Initiative's core framework for understanding the principles of accessibility, so the perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And then we added the STEM element. And Shauna, you were going to walk through that a little bit.
Sure. So the core principles are very high level. Is this perceivable? And when it gets sort of the rubber meeting the road and a faculty member is thinking about is the material I'm working with or thinking of adopting going to be usable by students, they have to think more concretely about what does perceivable mean in this particular context. And there are a bunch of ways that we may all be familiar with that people think about when they're thinking about accessibility, things like alt tags on images or captions on videos or appropriate uses of headings and documents. But then there are a set of concerns that come up specifically when you're working with STEM materials over and over again, where it isn't clear how the POUR principles necessarily apply, or there aren't a lot of good guidelines. So we extended the sort of POUR set to sort of explicitly acknowledge this additional dimension that when you're working with STEM OER resources, there are particular sorts of resources and information delivery that we want to provide faculty with guidance on, because there's not a lot of good guidance around. And particular categories include things like how equations and formulas are represented in OER, how data visualizations are presented, how data tables and simulations and maps show up. Those are things that show up over and over again in STEM and OER content, but for which there aren't a lot of good guidance in the standard guidelines about, well, how do I make sure that as I'm putting together this OER or trying to select an OER to use my students, that I can make sure it's as usable by as wide an audience as possible. So we developed, as we sort of fleshed out this set of accessibility criteria, we explicitly included guidance, both checklists that you can go through quickly, broader definitions, so that faculties can make that jump from realizing they may have something they need to think about to really understanding that. Sort of a big piece of this document is helping faculty who may not have dealt much with these issues make that initial foray into expanding their view of what it might mean to make their materials available to all students. So the definitions and then best practices and examples provide sort of initial stepping stones for a faculty member sort of who thinks accessibility is important, but isn't exactly sure what that means. It allows them to make the jump from that to the specific materials they have in hand and to how they might make some initial approaches to that and to learn more.
Great, thanks, Sean. And just a quick spin through the guidebook and framework. Licensed CC BY really tried to make it as accessible itself. So alt text for the images, used the right heading formats and things like that. But the way it's set up is that we introduce the work, we explain the framework we're using, how it aligns to other accessibility evaluation tools in the field, and then we move into each of the 23 elements organized under the POUR framework. And so, for example, if we skip down to the first one, under perceivable, we've got the element name, the checklist component, some best practices, and then if people want to, they can skip down to definitions, considerations, and then tools that they can use. I don't know if you can see this, sorry, can actually increase it, but tools that folks can use to actually check for that element in their resource. And then they can jump back up to the checklist. So we're trying to make it so that folks can move through the document easily. And I'll just skip down to the STEM that is probably the most interesting part. So here's where we bring up how they can evaluate equations and formulas, data visualizations, data tables, simulations, and maps. And again, it has all those elements, best practice checklists, and definitions and tips. So there we go. The framework and guidebook ends with a resource library where we try to aggregate all those tools that we mentioned, and then a list of sources at the end that we pulled on to do some of the writing. because there's a lot of great information out there already. And there we go. So, lessons learned. So for the work, what we really found was that going through a very iterative cycle of gathering our advisor input and then gathering the faculty feedback and then going back to the advisor. So it was a very iterative process of gathering feedback, doing iterations on the checklist, the framework, the guidebook, and really, it really allowed us to kind of get that not only framing language down, but also the nitty-gritty of the actual components of the checklist and the definitions and what was relevant in STEM. So that was an important lesson there. Also, language was important. Especially our advisors taught us that when we're working with drawing faculty in to a tool like this, that really trying to speak to their needs and how they would view the accessibility work. So talking about things like the importance of personalizing content to individual student needs as much as they can, rather than speaking to making accommodations, would be language that would draw faculty in. So we sort of tried to set up the guidebook in a way that would speak to faculty. Another piece that we learned was that in designing the whole pilot itself and the instrument that we used to gather faculty feedback, we really needed to create a good instrument. And our first pass, so first we piloted the instrument itself with a small selection of the faculty that were going to then use it. And then we learned that it was a little bit unwieldy, so we had to make it more modular. So that was also an iterative approach, the pilot piece, and trying to refine that instrument so we could gather the best feedback. And then finally, engaging in opportunities that really allowed for cross-pollination that fed the work in valuable ways. And Amy, I wanted you to speak to an example there, if you could.
Sure. I think that speaks to the value of being part of the mini grant program in general, in the partnership across SCORE, getting to know those in the SCORE network through some of our recruitment and working with the CUBES network to have a common platform to do some of this work. And then I was able to participate in some of the other programs that Carrie mentioned, the Spline work and the SJEDI, that really were developing collegial relationships around some important topics, DEI and accessibility and OER among them, and UDL. So I think, you know, the overarching learnings to collaborate were really, really important to this project as well. So I'll just wrap up quickly before we go to Q&A, and anything else that Carrie, you wanted to add about it was now that the guidebook is out, we're doing dissemination and we're doing some presentations. We have a blog post coming out today, and we're going to participate in conference coming up. I'm sure Brian will refer to the MEOD Expo, and also we're going to present at the Open Ed Week, the first week in March, about the guide. And I think that's it, but except the other highlight, and happy to talk about that, is a little follow-on work, a pilot study where we are bringing in 6 STEM faculty to use the guide with their actual own courseware materials. And we're going to be doing that over the next 2 months.
Great, thank you so much. That was like exactly 15 minutes on the nose. So that's wonderful. I put a quick list of ordering of presentations so that folks can know when they are on deck next. Before, since we do have time for questions here, any questions for Iskmi and Cirque? You're welcome.
Just unmute and ask.
Yeah.
Just do it.
It's a small group.
Yeah, I have a question. There's so many things to do, and if you think about each thing you might want to do with regard to one item that's on your platform, do you give some sense about importance and priority? I've been looking at the guide, and I think it's terrific, and the specifics are there, but what needs most first, I guess I'm looking at, because a lot of people, thanks to your work, are beginning to think about this, and the key word is beginning.
The key word's beginning. I'll let Cynthia or Sean speak to prioritization, but I just want to say, in general, the guidebook is meant as an invitation to begin to do this work and to make the issues of accessibility less an obstacle to OER and less an obstacle to trying to address accessibility, which is extremely complex, as we learned, and continue to do this work. You can't cover everything, and you don't want to not start because of that intimidation. So Cynthia or Sean to add to that?
What we advise in the introduction to the guide is for faculty to start small and really think about the needs of their individual learners and focus on a few elements that really are aligned to their learners. And we had some feedback in the faculty pilot around the prioritization, and we tried to also organize the list of elements into sort of a priority list, but it really does depend on the learners and where the faculty wants to start, I think. Sean, anything to add maybe around the STEM pieces?
Yeah, I think one thing we have, the document isn't a comprehensive guide about how to do everything accessibility related to all STEM OER resources. And at some level, the guide is really picking those things that are likely to be high impact and easy to do for most faculty. One particular sort of thread that is you'll see often showing up there is about making the information available in multiple formats. And that may not be bringing to the end solution of making materials accessible to an individual student, but it's a prerequisite. If you're providing this information not only in a data visualization, but also as a downloadable table, the raw data, that opens up a whole lot more directions that a faculty member can go who may be using the OER to use the data in ways that accommodate their individual students, and also open up ways they may use the materials in other ways beyond the original conception of the OER itself. So that's sort of those are sort of easy wins that have broad applicability, even if they don't close the gap completely to making something completely accessible. So there's a focus on those sorts of solutions in the document.
Yeah. Wonderful. I'm going to pause because we're going to go on to the next presentation, but also there is going to be question and answer broadly at the end as well. So, and I'm sure also if it's a quick question, it can be answered.
Yeah, can I do a quick question, please, Carrie? Because just puppy may wake up any minute, right? So I might not get to be there at the end. Basically, I haven't had a chance to fully look at the guide, but I am helping to run 4 faculty mentoring networks on social justice issues in biology education, some of which are using data and graphics. And I'd like to know, one, if you would like us to or give us permission to pilot using it, and do you want me to get feedback from those people too? So that's a almost yes or no question.
That sounds great, Pat. Any use, and especially in that context, sounds like a perfect fit.
Yes,
I'm
and
happy to help.
Yes, and Pat, there is one element that tries to get at the relatable content from a social justice lens, and it'd be really great to see what folks think about that. Thank you.
Awesome. Look at that. New collaborations being made every second here at the SCORE Network. So Thanks, Pat, for volunteering that. And yes, I think Cubes also has been like, I'm so excited about this. We gotta find ways to use it. Okay, so core source Cubes, step on up. I assume that's Michelle and Aaron.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. So thanks, everybody. We are going to present our project about the creation of a sustainable platform that benefits both CourseSource and Cubes Hub. And this is a collaboration between Carrie and Sam Donovan, Jenny Kwan, Drew Lamar, myself, Michelle Smith, and Aaron Vinson, who will also be presenting with me. So first off, what are these two organizations, CourseSource and Cubes? CourseSource is a peer-reviewed journal that publishes OERs for undergraduate biology courses. We have built into our platform a backwards design approach. So our authors need to provide things like learning goals and information about their assessment strategies even before they get to the activities that they're doing in the classroom. It also employs a community-based approach. So we have dozens of editors that work with the authors to share their work. And our goal is to have a turnkey source for evidence-based teaching resources that other instructors can use in their classroom. So Cubes is a community of educators who share resources that empower students to use quantitative approaches to tackle biology problems. They help instructors collaborate, access computational software, and find high-quality OERs. And they've developed a web platform where instructors can explore and build on these resources. And so we wanted to connect in with that platform. So the problem that our mini grant was trying to solve is that our current web host is a commercial site, and they were increasing our yearly costs, and they were just too high to be sustainable. And we needed to find a new hosting platform. But what was also important is that we were able to find a hosting platform that was aligned with our OER vision. And we wanted to find this organization that would not only help us be more sustainable, but be aligned to what our goals were. So Cubes was connected with us through this project, and they were interested in hosting CourseSource because it brings additional partners to its network. It helps Cubes develop features and test and refine content. So over time, we've created certain features for CourseSource that Cubes was interested in, and they wanted to learn more about them to see if they had broad applicability across their website. And it just provided an opportunity to optimize workflow. So as Cubes begins to bring on additional partners, we can be a test case of how those relationships might work. So what we did for our mini grant was the overall goal was that CourseSource and Cubes would develop a collaborative prototype of the CourseSource articles on the Cubes Hub platform. And so to accomplish our goals, we created an initial prototype using a handful of articles. And we picked articles that had different types of features. They included videos or lab protocols, so we could sample the different types of articles we have on CourseSource. We shared our prototype with CourseSource advisory board members and the website committee specifically. We made iterative changes based on their suggestions, and then we presented an updated prototype to the entire CourseSource advisory board, 12 individuals. So what's great is there is unanimous support based on the prototype and the relationships we built for moving CourseSource to Cubes Hub. They of course had some additional minor changes, and we're working on those based on their suggestions. So now I'm going to let Erin take over, and she will walk through some of the changes and developments that we made with the prototype. Erin?
Great, thank you. So hi everyone, it's great to see you all. I'm excited for this celebration. We've been really having a great time on this project. So my name is Erin Vinson. I'm the managing editor with CourseSource. I'm at the University of Maine. So lots of snow here as well. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk you all through and show you the incredible work that Jenny Kwan has been doing to update and move the website over to the Cubes platform. So the way I'm going to do this is walk you through, just show you our current, the way the current page looks, and then what the new page will look like. So right now I'm on the home page. Hopefully you all see the home page of CourseSource now. Okay, great. So this is the homepage, our list of courses. If you're not as familiar with CourseSource, all of our lessons are organized by courses, so by discipline, many of which are aligned with learning frameworks from the professional society. So genetics, we use the learning framework developed with the Genetics Society of America. And so we have short blog posts down on this side. We have the most recent articles posted along the top. We do show some trending downloads, some of the most downloaded articles, as well as our Twitter account automatically feeds into the website. So now the big reveal, the Cubes Hub platform. Here is what our homepage will look like. And so again, we have the blog posts down on one side, the latest articles with a little bit more information, some of the numbers of views and downloads also shown. And then the courses kind of front and center, so it's really easy to navigate. The other thing that we're really excited about is that this little symbol up here on the top left that says courses will remain on every page throughout the website. And it's just a pop-out menu so that you can always access those courses, because that's really the main part of our website and the organization of the articles. So next I'll show you an article. So here's what a current article in the CourseSource website looks like. We have at a glance that includes the abstract, followed by all of the metadata that authors put in associated with each article, and allows pretty easy searching when people are looking for particular types of articles. The full article with all of the table of contents along the side, supporting materials, which are all the materials needed if you wanted to teach this particular lesson. There's a PDF of the article as well, and it shows the number of downloads. So again, the big reveal, Jenny's amazing work. Here is that same article, what it would look like on the Cubes website. So essentially, it's all of the same information, just organized in a different and we think kind of cleaner and more easily navigable way. We also have space. So what we hope in the future is to have authors provide a potential video walkthrough. And so we do have a spot, if that is something that they're interested in doing, that they can provide a walkthrough of the lesson. Thank you, Carlos. I see Carlos is excited. And then the last thing I want to show you is the course landing page. So as I mentioned, all of the articles are organized by courses. One of the benefits of CourseSource, we think, with users is that they use these learning frameworks that are available through several of the partnership societies. Genetics Society of America is one. So it shows the society learning goals, and then the articles that are aligned with that particular lesson goal. So that's what it currently looks like. And then people can download the PDF learning framework. And then here is what Jenny has done. So again, we have the same information from the Genetics Society of America. It's a little bit easier to open and close the various learning goals. We still have the list and links for all the lessons. And then if people want to open a new one, rather than it just creating a huge list. I think I will stop there. I don't want to take up all the time. So Michelle, if I missed anything, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'll go back to our slides.
Great, thank you, Erin. Hold on. We put some screenshots in on the off chance we were having internet issues. So the great thing about this mini grant is that it came with some pretty big outcomes. And the first we're really excited about is that we're migrating all of the CourseSource articles to the Cubes platform by April. And quite frankly, we wouldn't have the time, energy, or expertise to get this done without the support from this mini grant. And we are extremely grateful for that. The other nice thing is it's brought upon long-term collaborations outside of just migrating course source to cubes. So in August, we collaborated on an NSF IU's proposal to increase the number of course source lessons that can be taught in an online environment. Before the pandemic started, we had very few online lessons, and we are recommended for funding to put a lot of efforts into increasing the online lessons that we're able to offer, and also studying the creation and implementation. And we're really excited about that. Both the program officer and the reviewers noted that a great strength of our proposal was the collaboration between course source and cubes. And so again, we're really thankful that this mini grant brought us together in a way that we were ready to apply for future funding. In addition, cubes has of course had a big influence on us and what we proposed. So we'll be hosting faculty mentoring networks focused on publishing and implementing course source lessons in online instructional environments using the platforms created by cubes. We were also recently, as of yesterday evening, contacted about receiving some additional new seed grant support to start to expand course source into physics. And so we are really excited about the potential to expand to other disciplines. A year ago, if you would have asked us about this, we would say, I don't know, we're really uncertain about our future. We don't know how to navigate. We have all these questions. But because we received this mini grant and we're able to start on the website migration, we're now able to take on new projects. So we really appreciate that as well. So thinking about sustainability, which is something that Erin and I think about all the time when it comes to course source, we really have taken home this recommendation from the SCORE network about the benefits of multiple partners, and integrating course source and cubes has amplified the impact for both groups while increasing our efficiencies. We're still a little short, and so to cover some of our ongoing infrastructure costs, we are looking at the possibility of having to introduce modest author page charges. We're going to try to keep it as low as possible. But one of the benefits of being partnered with Cubes is that the nonprofit organization BioQuest can help us with that endeavor. We're really nervous about doing this, of course, for many reasons, but one of which is most of our authors have teaching positions where they don't get grant money to have article page charges for research. And so we are very cognizant of the fact that we appreciate the diverse number of institutions where our authors come from, and we're seeking additional funding ideas to try to avoid these page charges and/or fundraise to offer scholarships so that we can keep a wide variety of authors contributing to our journal. So for the last, the lessons learned for additional projects, I think the big ones here is that we really thought about the prototype, but we kept the larger goal of migrating course source to cubes at the forefront of decision making. The trust among the partners was key. I've never worked with a group so quickly and established trust so fast. We both really wanted this to succeed and constantly had each other's best interests in mind. The other thing is each person had a very specialized role. So we would contribute to the greater good, we would meet briefly and then move into our tasks and then meet again a week later, and that made a huge difference. And members of the team were really great at listening, considering the options, and then quickly making decisions about whether ideas were effective or ineffective. And that allowed us to move really fast through this mini grant. So I think that's our last slide, Erin. Yes, thanks for listening, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah.
So I have a, oh, go ahead, Pat.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's really exciting, really great.
Thanks, Pat. We're really excited too.
So I was struck by the lead article on squirrels, and I saw a piece about how squirrels can remember literally thousands of locations of acorns. And I live on land that's owned by squirrels, and I watch them all the time. And so if I wanted to know more about squirrels, is the search engine a good one that you have? You feel good about it?
Yeah, yes, we absolutely do. I think at this point, if you enter squirrels into our search, you'll come up with quite a few articles. We've worked a lot with this group called SquirrelNet. And what had done is they published 5 teaching modules which was great because it provides field experience for anyone anywhere that pretty much has access to squirrels. And then once those were published, of course, COVID hit and they said, let's figure out how to do this online. And so that article was the most recently published, and how to adapt each of those 5 modules to online. So there's a lot to learn about squirrels on the course.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah, and one neat thing too is they were just funded separately from us by the NSF based on the fact that they were able to get all their articles into CourseSource. So now they're able to go off and get other funding, which has been really nice to see it trickle out. Yes, National Squirrel Foundation. Yeah.
You know, you get a bunch of science people together and we can make jokes like this, right? I think it's really exciting. Also, the expansion into physics is really interesting. So I look forward to hearing how that moves forward as well, because I have all sorts of questions. But I also want to say that one of the things that on the CUBE side that we're excited about too is the development of that menu that you all saw. Not the menu where it expands out, but more explicitly like the way to browse resources via course, or the way to browse resources like that. And so because we've been putting development time in on the CUBE side to bring that feature to market, that will benefit every group that's on CourseSource. So that's also really wonderful. Pat, did you have your hand raised for another question, or is that an old hand? Okay, just checking. Okay, so the next person that was up, I think, is Brian
Yep.
for Semiode.
So I share screen, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and so we're on.
We are on.
You can all see that. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I thank the Foundation, of course, and I thank Angela for coming here. The 2 most valuable currencies we have are time and resources that are measurable, at least. And so by her being here and by Hewlett funding us, they're demonstrating a commitment to us, and we appreciate that. What I want to talk about is a migration of this project called Semiode into cubes, and gaining efficiency and expanding visibility. The notion of a better menu, a better search engine, all of these kinds of things. These are the organizations that are actually involved in this. And of course, we're talking under the conversational mantle of SCORE. I thought I would just go through and tell you a little bit about these organizations. Of course, we know what's central, and that's the Hewlett Foundation. We know all about SCORE. I'm going to be talking about Semiode, which is Systemic Initiative for Modeling Investigations and Opportunities with Differential Equations. Don't hold your breath. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit formed in 2013. We have received correspondence for a number of years with the people at CUBES. And through the final efforts of Science Gateway Community Institute, SGCI, and if you haven't done anything or heard about them, you need to do something. They've been mentoring us in terms of everything from design, usability, sustainability, et cetera, and are helping us with free consulting on everything, including the technical jump we're about to try to make with CUBES. All of these platforms, CUBES and Semiode, sit on Hub0, which is based out of Purdue University and was formed from a nanotechnology grant long time ago. The 4 groups I'm talking about, Hub0, SGCI, CUBES, and Semiode, are all NSF funded. And so I'd like to talk about the need for Semiode and what it does, just to give you an idea. What we try to do is support high school and undergraduate faculty who are teaching differential equations, the course that comes after calculus for many students, especially engineering and STEM students. But Traditionally, it's been taught as a technique: grind, 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 groan, groan, groan. And if you talk to any engineer and you mention the word differential equations, they usually leave the room. The notion, what we want to do is to motivate with modeling and realistic activities. And many of ours are in biology. And rather than do a biology one, I thought I'd just show you one with a little bit of physics. And this is trying to model the rate at which a column of water falls, a classical physical problem. So what we do is we have videos for various configurations and apertures in a hole in a 2-liter bottle. And we have a clock, and students can stop and start and collect data. Here's an example of the falling height of the column of water. We appeal to Torricelli, who was a student of Galileo, and we talk about some basic physics principles, conservation of energy, and we arrive at a differential equation by equating two ways to compute energy and setting them equal to 0, and we try to build a model, and we want to estimate this parameter B, which may be a function of how big this hole is, the viscosity of the fluid, etc. So here we have a first attempt. The blue is the data and the red is the model. And this is in a spreadsheet, and students can tweak the parameter B and see if they can get a better fit. So that's an example of what we do. And faculty usually use this material before they actually talk about how to solve this differential equation. They use it to motivate why on earth you'd want to solve a differential equation, because you want to get some information that models the reality. So sustainability. We were talking about sustainability in the last session. We have 3 issues of sustainability I wanted to talk to you about. One is a Simiode challenge using differential equation models. Undergraduate high school teams. We just finished our 5th example and we had to go virtual. So students produced 10-minute videos. We had about 180 teams, 500 students, 380 judges from around the world. Teams were from one school or students just signed up. We had 3 high school students from different countries with a coach from yet another country, all participate as one team. They worked on one of 3 problems, modeling the Gulf of Mexico oil agglomerates and the way they are decaying, modeling a viral parrot going around on a wheel and how that happens, and modeling how settlements, refugee settlements deal with disputes. These are 2 opening pages of some of the outstanding ones, and these are all readily available. We charge a modest registration fee, and everybody volunteers, including 380 judges around the world. The next one is we're producing a text. Everything is OER inside Simiode. But what this text will do is serve as a substitute for a multi-$100 commercial text for about $45. It'll weave the material in the Simiode in a structured way so that a teacher could use this text for students as opposed to the traditional one and benefit from the free OER materials as well. That's coming online with the preliminary draft versions anyone wants to look at now. But by the 15th of May, we intend to have it completed for consideration in the fall or the next spring. The third sustainability effort is to run the conference, as Amy Godwin suggested. We've had the ICSME people doing not just one 20-minute session, but 2 20-minute sessions because we think it's so valuable. And what we're doing here is charging a modest fee for students and non-students. And we have all kinds of sessions. And if you just go Simiode Expo, you can see all you want to do. And these are the opening mini courses and the variety. We have 2 on creativity and art and mathematics. Here's math biology course driven. Here's some specific topics. And again, some more specific topics that are interest. So we're working with cubes. And as has been introduced, they are a community of individuals and organizations. They pay a big bill to get the no hassle Hub Zero, and Hub Zero tries to do all of the updates and all of the big things that have to go on. Simiode's been existing out there on our own as an open source where we try to do that. And we basically have one lead, a technical director who happens to have a PhD in applied math, but also a passion for what we're doing, and one Master of Fine Arts technical director. We began talking with cubes long before the summer of 2020. We met Drew and Carrie at conferences and have talked about the possibilities of helping each other, and we have helped each other. But when I met with SGCI, it really pushed me to really go and think beyond ourselves. And then along came this opportunity for funding from the Hewlett through the SCORE project. And I really call that the tipping point. And so what we did is apply to get money to migrate every instance. Cubes hosts many organizations, one of which you're going to hear next. We have hundreds and hundreds of resources, teaching modeling activities, modeling scenarios, we call them, possibilities for that, all kinds of stuff. And we have to figure out how we migrate all of that. It's been much harder than we thought. We also want to improve the search capabilities inside Cube based on a good tagging ontology and making ours better as well. So our progress was to finish this all by December 2020. What were we smoking when we thought about that? But we've met many of the objectives, but we think it'll take until the spring to do this. We are going to do it. The support for it is strong. We have internal funding to keep going the technical work. These are the personnel from the three main organizations. Hub Zero technical people are paid by an SGCI grant, which we don't have to pay for at all. And these are the two technical people here. And you've heard Jenny's name mentioned before in terms of the elegance of what she is able to do. These are the people from SGCI who are all over the place. What are the benefits? Well, we're implementing the capabilities you saw in the course source, namely how often is your material used? We don't know that, but we will because of our using the tools that Cubes have developed. We will benefit from being right next to other groups like Math Modeling Hub. We'll be able to use many of the features, the social features that we've struggled to try to adapt on our own. We all hope to benefit from ontology. We want to benefit from the notion and the structure of faculty mentoring networks, although we have groups and subgroups and so forth. And we want to build more professional relationships with math and biology as well as others. And we're interested that Core Source is going to adapt physics. That sounds good. Benefits for Cube is broadening the base, gaining the technical expertise from our technical directors and their energy, bringing more resources in biology and mathematics of differential equations, which is prevalent in our world, bringing sort of rent, financial support. We would commit funds from our sustainability effort to make Cube sustainable, and the idea to exchange efforts with other people. So we think of it as a win-win opportunity. These are the tasks, and I'm not going to go through these. When I go to the meetings, all the technical math, computer geeks are talking about these things, and usually I just leave the meeting. So we've had delays. SGCI is trying to do many things. We're all trying to do many things. So we couldn't meet the deadline that we set. We're in communication with the two technical people, and we have continued conversations and accomplished much. But in order for us to actually pull the plug on where we are and say, we're finally over here, we're going to have to do quite a bit more. It's known, but it just has to be done. Semioid has an internal timeline. We only have so much support for our two technical people, and we get to demand that for other smaller things. Drew Lamar is the lead tech person at Cubes, and Drew and Mark and both full-time teaching and children, et cetera. And so we've had troubles getting together. One of the things is we have to figure out how to make this work and how to get back on schedule. And I'm sure we can and will because we want it to work and it will help us all. We need to set and keep some realistic schedules. We've been doing that, but then things would just drift and responsibilities weren't met. And so we have to be more crisp. And I was pleased to see the Core Source people pointing out that's important. We have expertise to do the job. We respect the complex lives of others. We have a sense of pride that we want to do this, as many people want to when they move to Cubes, and we possess the knowledge. So basically, we're doing this transition. We're hopeful that in the spring, at the latest by May, we'll have this completed and we will be comfortably living inside cubes with a nice front end that Jenna and the people from SGI supply. We like this scrimshaw that says, if you're not the lead dog, the view never changes. And we think of ourselves as leaders, as we all are in our own right. I like Vince Lombardi's quote that says, the only place that success comes before, what does it come before? Oops. The only place that success comes before work is in the dictionary. And so we are about differential equations, but I'm going to defer to you about questions, comments, and conversations. So I'd like to think of us as differential equations. So that's the end of the presentation. And I'll stop sharing the screen with you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Angela wrote you a note in the chat. Unfortunately, she has to move to another meeting, but she caught, I think that was just at 1. But she wanted to thank everybody here and we'll listen to the recording for the last presentation that she missed and the panel after. I think the one thing I would like to thank you, Brian, for is the effort to reach out to a lot of the other SCORE network members for all of these other activities, like involving folks in the Semiote Expo and things like that. So thank you. Are there any questions for Brian?
Maybe one of my questions, I'm sorry to jump in, is so I was wondering, Brian, are you guys going to have a similar look to what CoreSource looks like? Because I'll be honest, right now, I want what CoreSource has for MM Hub. So
well, one thing is we're going to have a look that's quite different than what we have now. As you can see, I put this presentation together and I'm a word person, not a visual person. So we have an MFA person on our staff. SGCI has given us usability stuff, and Jenny is there at Cubes. So our main goal right now is getting all the stuff over there and then putting the front end on it, and also taking advantage of the artistic nature and the layout. So yeah, we hope to be there because what I just saw was very attractive from what CoreSource was doing.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing, and maybe I'm jumping ahead to like a panel topic, so you all can think about this, is like CoreSource and Semiote represent sort of 2 different ways to move. And part of that is because of the types of platforms that they're moving from. Semiote's already on something run by Hub0. CoreSource is run on a completely different architecture. But the first step of the CoreSource was the design experience. Sorry, getting interrupted by a little kitten. See that? Because I talk with my hands and she wants to talk too, apparently. But then Semiote is going with a products first transition, which I think is sort of an interesting but different migration pattern. And so it'll be interesting for us as Cubes to look back and sort of say, like, what were the pluses and minuses with going kind of from this 2 different directions as a collaboration space or process. So I think that's kind of interesting from a personal perspective.
One of the main things is just having your people find stuff in your site. When we went to an SGCI bootcamp workshop in May 2019, we put a PhD for meteorology in front of our site, and I said, go and find lessons on population biology. And he kept searching for lessons, and we never ever used the word lessons. We conspicuously used modeling scenarios. And I sat there and watched this very bright 25-year-old totally frustrated because I asked him a simple task and it wasn't his fault, it was our fault. And so getting whacked with a 2x4 was very, very important. And it told us we need to get more of our act together, and we're working on it all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's amazing how things that look simple on the outside actually end up being quite complicated when you go inside and you look to, or do a little more investigation, I guess is the way of saying things. Which I think actually is echoed in a lot of the other presentations we've heard, which have engaged in a significant amount of stakeholder feedback throughout the projects. And so I want to point that out too. That seems to be a real success piece. Also, hi, Zeke says hi. So this is like pet show off time as well. Community building, it all goes under community building. Any other short questions for Brian? Otherwise, I'll move on to the last group, and then we can have a broader discussion. Okay, so for the last presentation, we've got MM Hub in collaboration with CourseSource to talk about their faculty development groups.
I should probably unmute. It's as if I haven't done this before. Yes, hello. No, it's. I think I come to you come to these groups, and this is like any conference anyhow. But I think I'm always sort of like really happy to see people. Then I'm really guilty about the things I didn't do with people because there's all this work I probably should have done. But then I end up being like excited and motivated to do stuff. So thank you all for giving me all those emotions, right? Being I think I'm sharing the, yes, do I have the right share here? I'm on this one. All right, well, as Carrie said, you can see I have the low res version of the CourseSource logo here. So I apologize to Michelle, Aaron, and all CourseSource people for that. Here on behalf of also my other two collaborators, Jason and Rose, and excited really to share what we've been doing with certainly the help and support of Carrie, Maggie, so many of you out there, really on this call, and the Hewlett Foundation. So Math Modeling Hub, we live on cubes, and what started, I think, as the idea for let's have a centralized repository for lesson plans, materials such as that for math modeling educators, really pre-K to 16, has is focused on trying to build community in that area and encourage a spot for faculty and students really to develop, have discussion, incorporate mentorship, all those types of good community building activities. CourseSource, we've heard about them. They do a much better job of explaining what they do. I think what attracted, what started this relationship is that they're an open access journal, right? For teaching resources, peer-reviewed teaching resources. And that's really exciting, excuse me, from my perspective, because I think that one thing we both really share is this understanding of the time commitment and energy commitment, right? That every educator makes when they're doing the learning and producing curriculum. And so there's this shared understanding between these groups, and that was not something we had to discuss, really, because we both get it. And of course, then I think to be part of this project, it's also that we have a lot of awareness that we want to provide more folks the opportunity to engage in real meaningful curriculum development and curriculum sharing, which is, I think, one of the cornerstones of sort of the OER life cycle, right? So really to engage in that life cycle. So let's see if I'll get there. When we stepped into this project, I think we did a pretty good job getting these things, but we were out here and wanted, from the Math Modeling Hub perspective, we need more materials. So we've heard from Brian, we've heard from Aaron and Michelle. We've heard from these groups that have a lot of materials on their site. We don't have as many. And a lot of it, I think, is because our focus too is we recognize the value in getting folks to engage in modeling in earlier grades. And it's even, I'm going to argue, perhaps even more time consuming for some of those folks to find the time to share what they're already doing. We also are working to build our community. We're fairly new. And also, think that this is part of like this model that we can build, right? Some sort of model for providing a space for folks to share their work. For CoreSource, they moved online like we all did this past year. I think they were able to get some additional feedback and perspective from a different group in inviting us in. And also, maybe, they always have collaborators in physics now. So the opportunity for collaborations with mathematicians as well. We already talked about that with Brian as well. So there's lots of collaborators out here for you. For SCORE, I've had the opportunity to be part of FMNs and run some as well. And I think that it was one of the positives, right, is being able to go out there and try a new approach for a workshop model. So I'm excited to share that with you. And certainly Rose and Jason and Michelle and Aaron were all big parts of building that. We all were. And I would say that just overall, right, more interdisciplinary collaboration. So some of the things that Brian shared with us. So what did we actually do for our writers workshop? This was, I would say that one of our big goals, if I had to say it that way, was let's build this thing and see how it gets out there. Jason and I both had the chance to participate as active observers. I have to smile when I say that because I don't know what it means really. It means that we were there. We were participating, but we were observing or something in between those two things, right? So we were out there, we were doing stuff, and it was really fun. It was, the good old days of early COVID or something, or mid-COVID or something. We were out there, the wild west of the internet, and trying to figure out how all these things would work, or of Zooming, I should say. And we did have, it really, what happened is we learned so much from Aaron and Michelle in how they took what I would say, what I love is their writing studio short course lesson manuscript planning worksheet. I think that's the whole thing. I was trying to remember all those words. Anyhow, they have a great tool that they use to scaffold the, they use to share with participants in order to scaffold their work and write their projects, right, for future manuscripts. So we've been attracted to that, and now we got to see it in action. And the way that they ran it this year is through three consecutive days of 4-hour meetings. And a lot of that time was dedicated to paired or small group work. And people would pair up, they'd talk about what they're doing, they'd move it forward. Really inspiring. Then Rose, Jason, and I had the chance to sort of look at their materials. Clearly, there's a lot of similarities in developing curriculum or sharing curriculum for math folks as there would be for biologists, but there's also a lot of differences. And in particular, we were focused for this first workshop on inviting or having participants that were mostly teaching at the high school level. So there are some significant differences there. And those were some modifications that had to be made to the worksheet so that it was understandable. And there's phone calls here. I know you can hear stuff. But so we went out there, and I'd say one of our biggest challenges this year, and we'll talk about it later, is recruitment. We probably had emails go out to at least 1,000 folks. And we had 14 applications. And 12 people joined our workshop. But what we really did here, and you can see, is instead of having these 3 consecutive days, we tried to spend a lot of time focusing on community building. We knew that'd be important for our group. So we had 3 1-hour Zoom sessions that led up to our three four-hour Zoom sessions that were on consecutive Saturdays this past October. Those were not 3 consecutive days. It was supposed to be like in person at that point. And we even gave our workshop participants, we ran a poll to see what they prefer to have, like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or 3 consecutive Saturdays. 3 consecutive Saturdays won, and it seemed to work out pretty well. We followed that up with 2 one-hour sessions. And then we also continued things in the workshop, and we have continued. There was a 2-hour, very much optional Zoom session that we, that we ran with our folks in December, and we've been communicating with people since then as well. Yeah, there's lots of exciting things happening here. So I have lots of exciting stuff. Yeah, and I really want to highlight, though, that we were starting with community building and really trying to gain familiarity with our overall goals for the workshop. When we got started, those 3 intensive, when I say intensive, that was going to be our writing time, very much spending more time mimicking the core source experience. And we had a good amount of follow-up to do, and there still is. So we continue, I think, to engage with this group of participants. I think one of the biggest things that we were excited about is what what the participants thought of their interaction with the Math Modeling Hub Writers Workshop. They said nice things. I think, if anything, you can read these just as well as I can. Probably the criticism that was shared with us, maybe other people were thinking it as well, especially as we moved further into our consecutive Saturdays. There was a bit more. There was more work to do. If you can envision the writing worksheet, and I know you're not familiar with it, so it's a bit cryptic when I mentioned it before. This writing worksheet that CoreSource has a list, I'm going to say, of about 24 to 30 questions on it, or prompts that people will enter, and as you move through these different days, you're filling in the things in your form, but you're really creating your lesson plan, right, to share with others. And everyone had familiarity with everyone else's lessons, some familiarity, but when you started to pick those nits and you wanted to go back and review someone else's work before meeting with them, it got to be a bit much, like by the 3rd Saturday. So we made some alterations, and we weren't putting people with new people at the end. But otherwise, people, you can see, I feel like these are some positives, especially when it's like, I was talking too much with my partners. That's a good thing, in my opinion, especially when you're building relationships and developing, developing trust that allows you to really collaborate. So one of the other outcomes is we need materials. So these things are still to be published, but they're right in that zone. So we're right about to get there. Just a list of some of the variety that we have here. I know that our group is not all math centric. We care about STEM things for the most part, but I'll just let you know that this does a good job of, we have algebra, we have certainly some AP calculus. So we're sort of running the gamut here a bit, and what you'd find in a high school setting. And we even have a biologist, right? So that was exciting. Someone who's in science. We did ask some questions about their continued interaction. We were hoping to build community, as I mentioned earlier. And this survey, this was part of there weren't a lot of survey questions, but we did send this out following our last intensive Saturday meeting. And we're very happy that of the 11 folks who responded, most everyone, most everyone clicked at least something, right? We had these different comments here where I really think, there's a great intention to stay engaged and involved. And as you'll see here, there were even a thing of like other things you'd like to do, and people just gave us some additional responses. So other ideas like that I think are wonderful, like they want to represent and share what they did at different meetings, National Day of Math Modeling. And also, I think, you know, some very honest reflections here, just saying like, well, it's, you know, I want to do this. It's kind of hard right now. It's definitely a sense that you would hear from people. And just the fact they were able to get out there and meet with us is something that I know that our whole group was just so pleased and just happy they were able to do that. So, you know, overall outputs, I've already mentioned this, you saw, I think I listed 11 different lessons up there. So those are ones that are, we actually do have, we have all those 11 on Cubes, on the Math Modeling Hub, in varying levels of ready to go-ness. Now that I've been inspired even more so by seeing what Core Sources page looks like, that's one of our big things we'll get to in a second of future work. We have 10 of our 12 participants. I think that our retention rate, if you will, was reasonable and probably expected. I mean, we have of the 12 people, they're all still engaged. I know there's one person who did have some significant things happen, not good things happen in their life, and so we haven't heard quite as much from them. But and I don't know why we have one person missing from that list. I have to reach out to them again. But also, we're really excited about this as a proof of concept for other models, for other workshop models. And, you know, I'll say in a moment again that we're excited to run this again, but also we're excited to use this as part of a proposal for future funding. We think it's been really effective at doing many of the things that we wanted to do: get materials, build this network, and, you know, encourage collaboration in this area. We also, you know, I would say there's no doubt that, I mean, this is all, you know, the willingness of CoreSource to work with us was invaluable. We look forward to learning more from them, and you know, I think I just learned something else, right? So what else can I say about that? And we have had the chance to, you know, disseminate some of our work already through Cube Summit this past December, and we went at JMM. You know, Jason and I were there, and we'll look forward to doing some more dissemination as well. And as you can see from before, we also have participants who are doing that. In fact, one of them will be working with COMAP very soon to do one of their podcasts. So we're very excited that there's some folks who are very active and excited to now be part of this new community, new to them community. Some of the challenges here, just to keep us going, I think I want to make sure I keep time there, but we did find, I think this is going to be consistent beyond COVID. You know, I remember this from my FMN as well, my FMN experience in running one. It doesn't matter what's going on, we're all busy. There might have been extreme busyness or strange things happening right now. I do think we benefited, you know, there was some benefit in having a single voice. You saw that there were Rose, Jason, and I all were facilitators. I did serve as the email person. I'm certainly not saying I'm great at that, but I think that was valuable to have each of us sort of have some little tasks that was mentioned in one of the other proposals. We did have quite a variety in projects and even in modeling experience, more so than we thought. This is a conversation we even had recently with Aaron and Michelle, and saying that could be valuable to be able to focus in more. We'd like to have a future workshop that had more focus, maybe on a course area. But that being said, it was really valuable right now as we're looking at the big picture to have our group be able to see this variety. Finally, our publication template, it was not ready to go. And in fact, I think we have some more work to do. I'm bringing up CoreSource again, because one of the things we came out with at that December meeting was the value of one of our projects on drones, in which we said, well, what if someone doesn't have a drone? And we kept on coming back to this. We said, well, could you make a video? You know, the person who runs this activity is a great speaker and very enthusiastic, and just likes flying their drone as well. And they said, well, of course I can do that. Can I put a video on? So we need that. We need that already. That's the thing we need, is to be able to put videos on there. So but this was also exciting because we were able to constantly and come back to the group and say, what do you need? What do you want? And I really think we have this opportunity for ownership that will move forward. That's what CUBES is about, in my opinion, is that you all have a place at the table. Like I said, we'd like to keep doing this again. We all had a great time. This is, I think I mentioned this somewhere else. This is one of my happy moments of 2020. If I have to think back to 2020, it's going to be taking part in this writers workshop. Like I said, we already had a participant, not the other person I was mentioning, who helped facilitate one of our last meetings and share their experiences. It was wonderful. So people are taking these leadership roles, and we know there's room for them to engage in the Math Modeling Hub in many different ways. We're excited that they're finding those places themselves. We're excited to give folks who express strong interest in moving forward a title of Math Modeling Hub Writers Workshop Fellow for this year. And as I mentioned, they're already starting to take part there. This is also, will tie into the need that we have for reviewers, right? So it's not just people who are an outward facing presenter or something like that. There's going to be a lot of work to do within, similar to the work that's happening in some of these other, other projects. I've already mentioned the value of working with so many great people. We look forward to continue to be part of the network and getting feedback and learning from everyone. And we think that there is something good that came out of this, just from a documentation, maybe some variation of something that's already successful. And like I said, we'll continue to build it and try to make it better. So thank you so much. I'll just leave us with a picture from our very last meeting, which we had 9 of our group there and 3 of our facilitators. And thanks so much for having me here.
Thanks, Ben. Much appreciated. Before I, interrupt with any questions, does anybody else have any questions for Ben?
I just have a comment. I just wanted to say, I think Ben and Jason, like, the lowest common denominator is that they were active participants. I think the thing to remember is Erin and I had never run an online workshop ever in our lives before. And so we were doing this, we were trying our best. And then Ben and Jason said, can we come? And one of the things that we so appreciated is how nice you guys were about providing us feedback. We were in a very fragile time and we were unsure. And they just sort of gently came in and made suggestions. And even yesterday, Erin and I were like, oh yeah, we need to do that thing Ben and Jason suggested and have the pre-meeting. And so I just hope that you know that it was great to have people participating, but also people being so helpful with the feedback while we were trying something new. So thank you.
I think there were a lot of interesting opportunities. I mean, 2020 was very difficult and challenging in a variety of ways, but to the extent that it was leveraged as an opportunity to move our work forward together, I think is just a wonderful and great take home. So the fact that you all could share and be vulnerable enough to say, like, I'm trying this online workshop thing, come help me, and then we'll try it, and then you'll try it, I think is just a great example of that potential. So thank you, Michelle and Ben and everybody involved in your project.
So I wanted to add a couple of things. Is that all right? So Ben was talking about the return on the mailings of 1,000. One of the things I learned back in the 70s when I was starting a journal on cryptology, I bought 3,000 copies of the first issue and sent it to major libraries in the United States and this was all physical mail. There's no such thing as the internet, and got 2% return. I went to American Chemical Society meeting on how to promote journals. The American Chemical Society does focus groups on the color of their cover. I mean, that's how detailed these guys are. So I went there and I told them about my depression about getting 2% return. And they said, that's fantastic. If you get more than 1%, you're just remarkable. And I don't know whether I got more depressed by that or what, but it's just slow pickings. But the fact that you got a core of 12 And, you know, everybody has a personal problem. Some things are happening now. The fact that you got something going is important, and it may take mass mailings. One other thing is, I think we all look for positive comments. My son teaches entrepreneurship, and he runs a course with a bunch of people, and he makes a fortune at it, but that's another issue. And they ignore all positive comments. Positive comments don't do them any good. They look at the most negative comments they have. And one of the reasons is, for every one of those negative comments, if they address them, people out there who they never hear from would come to their world. So listen to the negatives, and I don't mean patronize them, but I mean really listen to them. And when they say whatever they say, do that. And finally, for this Scudem competition or challenge that we had 380 faculty commit to looking at 3 10-minute videos. That's all I asked them to do. I sent them the list of 5 because maybe they were coaching one and perhaps they shouldn't judge their own. Not only did they look at 5, they went scouring looking for even more from the list. So the average number of complete critiques that each team got was 8. And some of the critiques were like 10 pages of writing by a judge who essentially went minute by minute through the video saying at 12:01, you said, and so what I'm getting at is there are people out there who will, and you know, we all know this, and we need to be, you know, communally grateful for them, who will jump in and do amazing things. And we need to not embarrass them, but we need to praise globally those kinds of things. So you got a great return, concentrate on the negatives, and volunteers can really do things like reviewers. So I think we all learned stuff.
Well, thank you all. Now you can hear the real story from Jason. That's why we had him come.
What did I just jump in on?
No, I know Jason had somewhere else to be, but I just was sharing some of our work, Jason. So yeah.
And I mean, I think this is actually a great sort of entree into the broader panel. So I would open up for questions across all of the projects at this point, or discussion, just as Brian was talking about. I want to point out that in the conversations or the communities that we've seen presented today, each of them have had different levels of resources and have been around for different amounts of time. And so, you know, we saw some of that founding history from 2013 that Brian presented for Semiode. Cubes has been around as an idea since about 2013, funded in 2014 and by 2 funding sources. And but the infrastructure wasn't even online for another 18 months or so after that. And so, but that second funding infusion was $3 million. I mean, that was not a small scale of funding, which is a different level of resources altogether that Hub, you know, has access to, and, you know, is more kind of along the lines of what CoreSource, I think. Similar timeline, Michelle, a little bit later?
A little bit later. So the journal had a soft launch in 2015 and started to ramp up in 2018.
Yeah. And so I think like one thing that we need to also acknowledge is like that ramp up time and that community building time. And I feel like maybe, so like, yeah, I think our soft launch was around the same. It wasn't quite a soft launch. It was like more like internal use only in 2015 at that point. And then I think, and then, and so, yeah, about a 3 or 4 year delay until like people understood who we were, right? And like we were a little bit more ubiquitous. And I remember going to that GRC in 2019, and it was like, all of a sudden everybody knew what Cubes was, right? But like before that, maybe not necessarily. And I think the same thing, CoreSource, probably a similar timeline, but those were like fast infusions of $3 million in funding. Like that was a very different thing than like how, you know, Semiode started and Hub started. So their scale of recognition is different too. And so I think it's interesting to what extent like you all have provided practices like these writing workshops to get materials in, to build community for your journal, and then leverage that for asking for things like review later that newer groups like Hub can start. And I think it was, did Hub start sort of 2018, 2019?
2018, we launched at the, yeah, so, yeah, 2018 was our, summer was our, yeah, it was, a page was there.
A page existed.
Yeah, we were live in summer 2018.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I think it's good to learn about these practices from other areas. And I think it's really interesting to the extent that I hear all of you already talking about the importance of building community, when I think some think about OER as a thing you just Google for and use or submit by goodwill. And it's like, to have you all verbalize the community aspect is really important. I just in the chat window, so I'm going to ask a personal question, personal Cubes question. I was chatting in the chat window with Haley, who's also at Cubes. We were actually recently talking about helping streamline our own submission process. Like, we have been thinking about barriers to full submission, you know, from the submitting a resource point of view, and like, how can we make that easier? And part of this conversation was actually more because we were introducing new ontologies that folks might not be familiar with. So we wanted to be clear about that and be really clear about the licensing that folks choose and what that means. But I think also broadly, like, then we start talking about the submission process generally. And we were talking about the idea of giving folks like some heads up about the kinds of information they'll be asked through the submission process. And so then you all, when you, Ben, when you were talking about the worksheet that you borrowed and forked from Michelle and CoreSource, it made me think about, like, what would that worksheet look like for Cubes? And I wondered if you had those available publicly, or where we could find those as
definitely, that's part of our sharing plan, or, I mean, yeah, yes. Yeah, yeah.
And the same for you, Michelle. I don't know if you have that already posted on your website somewhere, that, or maybe Aaron can drop a link, or one of whoever's faster at that.
You know the answer to that one. You know it's not me. Yeah, but I think oh, yeah, it's already there for you from Aaron. I think also thinking about, I know we've had discussions sort of as phase 2 with Cubes about submission sites being part of what's offered, because now every time someone submits an article, we have to pay for that. It's not a huge fee, but it does mean there's money that needs to come in. And so what would that look like if you're submitting a journal article or a lesson that you've modified from someone else that you want to link? I think there's a real opportunity, perhaps maybe like a grant funded opportunity, to think about what peer review means for the collection of groups here, and how you don't want to design something that's so complicated that nobody can submit their stuff, but are there clear paths that we could all benefit from? And then tying into the first presentation, and I know work that we've started to do with Haley, thinking about how the directions can be revised to include some of the principles about broadening access to materials. That's something that we could really benefit as well. And I think a lot of that could come with a big push for a new way of submitting.
Yeah, and so I've been telling folks from ISKME and CERC, like, I am so excited when your guide comes out. I can't wait for Cubes to use it. And I think Pat pointed out one way in which it could get used, which is through the FMNs that we offer, which is wonderful. Another way is that we've been thinking about the tagging ontologies that we allow people to select. And Haley, jump in at any time, because I know you're in the middle of all these conversations too. But the tagging ontologies that people select, and even if people don't select them, showing them that this is a consideration, and bringing, like, we're changing the structure of the cyber infrastructure to get folks to think about pedagogical choices. And I think that's like a really interesting whole other thing. So we've experimented with like tagging structure for UDL, but it's not as full as especially in the accessibility section as what we have just seen. And so we are already thinking about how can we fold their framework into our system so that everyone can say like, yeah, I've checked all 1830 boxes. I've checked, you know, that many boxes, and we're good to go. We're like ultimate level. Not that that like fully describes all of accessibility, but like that would be really good to have. And what would that look like? I wondered, out of curiosity, I know I'm going on and on about sort of the CUBE side. I'm curious about, like, we have, you know, CERC folks here and ISKME folks which run OER Commons and other things. So I was just wondering if some of these other organizations have thought about sort of integrating metadata like around inclusivity, pedagogy, or accessibility into their sites as well.
Yeah, yes, Carrie, I was going to jump in when you were talking about the tagging, because that's what a lot of that underlies the project itself. Like, I mean, it's wonderful that the guidebook can function as an instructional tool and break down barriers for faculty to start doing OER that addresses accessibility. But undergirding that is this technical infrastructure based on tagging. So can there be some combination of manual work and automation, you know, back end under the scenes coding, where those metadata choices gets translated into tags that can transfer across platform? Because people are going to be working on, you know, in different spaces. Some may be in cubes, some may be in OER Commons. Can that metadata be shared and not siloed? Can that content, you know, move and migrate to wherever people need to do their learning? So we're really looking at these issues, and we would love to continue to collaborate. If this is an area of research that you or anyone on cubes or in SCORE network would like to do further research, that's what we're really looking to expand around, how to make it easier for the tools and for systems to understand accessibility, how content can be evaluated and meet accessibility requirements, and have that translate into metadata. So yeah, that's a long answer.
And I think, like, I remember having this conversation with Michelle a while ago when the first time I reviewed an article for CoreSource, because there's a whole thing about does it inclusive teaching or strategies or something like that? I can't remember the exact
we have
phrase.
an inclusive teaching section.
And I remember asking, like, what does that mean for CoreSource? Like, what are you asking me to look for? And like, if the tagging structure was there, that might have really helped with that conversation. So I think what's also interesting is not just having the conversation about the infrastructure, but then also being able to assess educational materials once you have that data from the back end as well. So
Yeah,
it's like personal.
No, and I think one of the coming up with ways to train the editors so that they, I mean, and then it helps the editors because then they're going to be teaching and using the practices too. And so I see a real benefit. And so one of the nice things about the NSF grant is they highly suggested that we find someone with UDL experience to help us. And then everyone highly suggested Haley. So we're excited to work with her coming on. So I know I feel proud of the way that NSF sort of pushed us to start to think about this inclusive teaching section and what it means and how we can communicate both to the authors, but the community at large. So
I'll just chime in from the CERC end here. The collaboration with that we've all been talking about just most recently here was very fortuitous for us. We had just built a prototype system within our own platform for recording generically accessibility information about the content that we hold. And that was really driven by a project level need. We host materials for lots of different projects. And some of those projects were saying, we want to be able to attest to the fact that our materials are accessible. And they were looking for a process, and many of them had a process, but then a way to record that information alongside the materials. So we have some back-end tools that allow people to say, some person has gone and attended to issues of accessibility with this particular piece of materials, and here's what they found on this date. But it's very open-ended. And we were sort of looking around for what might a useful structure be. So I think one of the things we'll do is adopt this framework or adapt it to that context in terms of the tools we already have in place for tracking things on the back end to support sort of project level concerns or interest in attesting to the accessibility of the resources. But on the flip side, we get a lot of materials coming in through our submission forms, activities, and lessons. And we've always thought really carefully about sort of what materials do we prompt the submitters for, sort of in this balance between we want to know everything, we want them to provide complete information, but we want people to submit. And so what can we ask them and what can we not ask them? And even going back to things like, well, we want to apply a controlled vocabulary as the topic. Are they likely to do that well if we provide them with 10 choices, or do they have to have a half-hour seminar on how to do that well, such that it's better if we just do it? So thinking about how to maybe not add this framework right into that process, but make it available on the side, but in a way that someone coming through knows that this is something they ought to be thinking about and attending to. It's not a requirement for putting something in, but if they are like their peers trying to follow good practices, this is a direction they should look, and sort of attaching it to that submission process. I think.
Yeah, Sean, we've had similar, exact same conversation going on in our groups about this. And one way that I think we've decided to do it is to present them with that ontology in the submission process, but put it as optional. So it's not required that they expand the menu and look at all the things underneath, but we hope that it prompts curiosity, and that they might think about this. And then I guess, like, for me, logistically thinking about, like, eventually, I mean, it would be great if folks could, what I like about our system is that they can version it, and then they can add, if they go back later and want to add more tags, they can just version it and then add more tags, which is nice. But like, how do we, like, there's all sorts of dangerous things if we do it on our end, because that requires human infrastructure. And then it requires us to understand intent about course design and lesson planning that I'm not sure we have the insight to do or to infer about certain pedagogical choices. Like, maybe we can say, like, check a box, does it involve group work? But group work in itself isn't necessarily inclusive pedagogy unless you're also attending to power dynamics within groups intentionally. And so, like, I don't know, like, it seems like a hard thing. There are some things I'm sure that are, like, you know, screen reader accessibility checks that are a lot easier than are these explanations accessible to everyone. I don't know. That might
there's also a dimension that I think we got into when we were building the framework, is there's a difference between the materials as we're presenting to someone and what they actually do with their students in the classroom.
Yeah.
And especially at the college level, less so at the K-12 level, there's often a giant gap between I've got some raw materials and a bunch of ideas about what somebody ought to do with them, and the way that actually gets implemented by an instructor in whatever time and space they have. And so you can't say this activity is going to be accessible because you don't know actually what people are going to do with it. But you can talk about this activity has, as presented, these materials as presented have these affordances which make it more likely, or make it more likely that even the instructor will consider this dimension to how they interact with the students. But that gets to not just presenting the material, but presenting some of the thinking about why the material was put together the way it was. Because often there's a lot of intentionality in how we construct an activity that's not evident in the student materials, but is important for implementing it in the way the author envisioned. So capturing some of that is often an important aspect.
Yeah. I feel like I'm dominating the conversation with my own intellectual curiosity. So if others want to jump in and ask other questions, I'll be quiet.
I have a question for all the grantees, which is, to some extent, this funding, it provided money, and you've all said like, okay, this helped us get it done, this idea that we had. And I'm curious if we can dig down a little bit, like, what exactly was it that you needed the funding for? Was it like to support your person hours? Was it to, support the website hosting fee or something like that? And particularly as we go about writing additional proposals, what could we do to continue to help support projects in general? Like, what do you need? Do you need money to pay stipends for people to write OER? Do you need money to host a regional conference? Do you need an organization that provides an umbrella certificate that sort of says like that, or something like that, to lend a little bit of weight to any certificate you might offer, or something like that? So like, what can we do that's helpful, and particularly where do you need the funds, essentially, or if that's what it is that you particularly need?
So we use the funds for strictly time for technical people. We took $20,000, we gave $6,000 to Cubes in recognition of work they have to do, and then we were greedy. We took $14,000 in recognition for what our technical people had to do. I think, though, that one of the reasons you might use the money for people is this notion of sustainability. For example, Michelle was talking about possible page costs. Well, you want to have a good enough product so that an author would be willing to pay some page costs or to come to your conference. So you have to invest in good technical people, and each of us can do some of that. I have learned to do HTML and do some of the front end pages and of our conference and everything. And I kind of dabble. I'm retired, so I don't have committee meetings and all these other things that, and children the rest of you have. But eventually you're going to have to pay someone either their time or actual cash to do things. And so money to pay people to do things to make what you're doing more attractive, easier, sustainable is well invested, I think. And that's it.
Thanks.
I think also, just to kind of follow up on what Brian was saying, is the money to sustain what we're currently doing and what we're trying to continue. Whereas, I mean, with, Michelle and I have talked so many times about the NSF for an example, but others certainly want to fund innovation and new ideas and ways to, grow the community, which is wonderful. And we love doing that, but we also need the money to sustain the work that we're currently doing.
This has been.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Amy. I think there's just valuing people's time. I think I see this again and again when I participate as a judge and with other judges for the now the MathWorks Math Modeling Challenge with SIAM. And I think I'd like to hear and talk more about this with and I also have participated as a judge for COMAP and their contest. And I think there's a lot more. It doesn't mean you have to give people some big salary or something for everything they do, but I think it is valuable when you have teachers like, I'm doing a lot of work for free. There's a lot of teachers out there that are just doing extra stuff because of course I care about it and I want to do it. And so I really see people being very appreciative of these things. And so that is a value. I don't know how much weight to put on it. And whether or not it just can be, I mean, there's also value in just sharing, when we can, in this case, being able to share food remotely, I think was really valuable. It was a nice sort of surprise, gift for our participants. And it was really, I think, really appreciated. And just, so those sorts of things help further strengthen that community, I think, as well.
I was just going to say, we put all the money to expertise, to our staff time, to having partners and bringing in expert advisors, folks that, really augmented the expertise in-house. And we would love to do further research on this. Not only is there's so much more to learn about the OER workflows of individual authors and curators, but at the systems level, you touched on, Carrie, the unknowns around how does a system administrator that's building collections of OER decide what tags to put on them, and how does that change discoverability? So we really are working on a lot of that. We have a 3-year grant through the IMLF to do some national digital infrastructure work around sharing meta tags across systems at the state level for digital libraries. So that's pretty exciting, and could dovetail with some of this work if we want to take it forward.
I have found that international colleagues are amazingly giving, and when someone from America calls them, they like that. I mean, whatever one thinks of politics and how we're looked at in the world, I think there is some cachet there, and I don't mean to abuse it. I also think that little things you can do. Ben mentioned some food. We think about goodie baskets that we used to bring at conferences and maybe sending them ahead. We gave certificates, a PDF, a lousy PDF with your name, thanking you for coaching. And I got from a woman in the Philippines basically saying, I didn't get my certificate. Meaning, you know, it's like your third grader who didn't get a star on her work because the
My
kid
college students love stars still.
Oh yeah, but the point was that we had missed her in that list. And so I sent her a deep apology and sent her, of course, a certificate. But it was interesting how meaningful. She wasn't the only one. The other ones were just saying thank you. I mean, we got all the others, I think. But little things you can do. And I think with Ben, we're all doing lots for free. And if we started to figure out our hourly wage by taking our salary, that would be, that's too harmful.
So, you know, one of the things we can think about is that maybe we're learning some lessons that we can convey to higher education in general about operating as a volunteer organization, that they, either our institutions or our funding agencies, need to recognize that people deserve to be compensated for their work in some fashion. But, you know, while we are still on the volunteer schedule, one thing that works really nicely for young faculty especially is to send not them a certificate, but send a letter to their department chair for their tenure file or their promotion file if they're not tenure track. And you might consider it, it actually works extremely well. And it helps compensate for not being rewarded. However, I really think we as a group and some other groups need to address the funders, the National Science Foundation, NIH, et cetera, and even some foundations, and get them to think about this sustainability. You cannot sustain the kind of work we are doing with 3-year, $100,000 a year grants. There has to be some investment to keep this all flowing. And I think we could have a voice that could convey that to the agencies.
Yeah, thanks, Pat.
Can I just add one other thing to Maggie's question? Really, the infrastructure of cubes and the computer programming help. I just think having that centralized is huge for all of us. So if it's possible, if we knew it, if it was a known cost, if it was reasonable for us, that's just a known entity that makes a huge difference for future planning.
Thanks.
One thing we benefited from the pandemic was we had workshops that we couldn't hold last summer. We weren't ready to do them virtually. So we're doing them this summer virtually, and we have all this money for travel, and we had stipends to pay people. So what we decided was we would just up the stipends to come to the workshop because we don't have to pay for you to fly. And I began to think, why on earth are we even doing these workshops? Although it's nice to go to Montana and ride down the Missouri or Manhattan in New York City, but maybe the future is in front of us and like the enemy, and we need to acknowledge it and say, we don't need money for certain kinds of things, and we could use it if we can get it, as Pat's suggesting, to just pay people for things. We certainly pay technicians, at least we do, and that's our biggest bill, and yet we don't necessarily have enough money and funds to pay for the producers. But I love the letter. We do that. Letter for people. I asked them if it's okay, and I actually asked them to tell me who to send it to, so that you don't just, you know, University of Mississippi and hope it gets there, you know.
I want to thank everyone for talking about this. I also think, you know, some grant programs pay plenty for participants, and some grant programs actually, you know, don't, like, you know, that it's more about infrastructure support, and sometimes there's this imbalance. And certainly I think all of us thinking about how to leverage this virtual opportunity is going to be important. It's 2 o'clock, it's a little over 2 o'clock, and I want to respect everyone's time. And I just want to thank everyone again for participating in the conversation, and more particularly the post conversation, I think was really exciting. And so I look forward to following up. You know, if any, you know, all these collaborations sound great, especially the really nerdy ones about analyzing metadata. So I just want to, you know, open the invitation again. Anybody who's interested in collaborating on any of these big issues as sustainability, equity, inclusion, moving forward, we're all in. So thanks so much for being part of this community. We'll let you know when a recording of this is posted so you can share more broadly. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
This was
Thanks,
amazing.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Nice seeing everyone. Nice seeing you, Pat.